My name is Owen Peterson, and I've worked at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery in Burlington, Vermont, for 6 years. It's a small municipal cemetery, about 40 acres, with grave sites dating back to 1843. My job is straightforward. I manage the records, birth dates, death dates, plot assignments, burial permits. I file the paperwork, update the digital database, and occasionally help grieving families locate their loved ones' graves when the headstones have worn down, or the office records are incomplete. It's quiet work, steady. The kind of job where nothing unexpected happens, because death, for all its weight, follows a predictable administrative process. Someone dies. A funeral home contacts us. We verify plot availability, assign a location, schedule the burial, and update the records. It's mechanical, routine, and I've always preferred it that way. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in curses or omens or anything supernatural. Cemeteries are just repositories for the dead, places where grief is organized into rows and marked with stone. I've walked those rows thousands of times, alone, after hours, and I've never felt anything but the cold and the silence. That changed on December 19th, 2023. It was a Thursday. We'd just gotten the first real snowfall of the season, 6 inches overnight, and the grounds crew was out plowing the access roads and clearing the main pathways. I arrived at the office at 8 a.m., unlocked the front door, and turned on the lights. The office is a small brick building near the entrance gate, one main room with a desk, filing cabinets, a computer, and a back room for storage. It's heated by a single radiator that clangs and hisses, but keeps the chill at bay. I made coffee in the small pot we kept on a corner table, the familiar ritual helping me ease into the day. The cemetery was quiet, as it always was in winter. Most burials happened in spring and summer, when the ground was softer, when families could stand graveside without freezing. Winter burials were rare, usually emergencies or situations where the family couldn't wait. I booted up the computer and checked my email. 3 new burial requests had come in overnight. 2 were standard, elderly individuals who'd passed after long illnesses, plots already purchased years ago by forward-thinking families. The 3rd was a Christmas Eve burial, an older woman named Helen Carmichael, who'd died suddenly on December 17th. The funeral home had requested a 10 a.m. service on December 24th, weather permitting. I logged the information into the database, assigned her to Section D, Row 12, Plot 7, and printed the burial permit. The printer hummed and spat out the form, which I signed, dated, and filed in the appropriate cabinet. Then I moved on to the next task, updating recent burial records from the past week. Around 10 a.m., the cemetery director, a man named Gerald Finch, stopped by the office. He was in his late 60s, gray-haired and weathered, with the kind of face that looked like it had spent decades outdoors. He'd worked at Evergreen for 30 years, first as a groundskeeper, then as director. He knew every plot, every tree, every corner of the property. He knew where the oldest graves were, which sections flooded in heavy rain, which paths were treacherous in ice. He was the cemetery's living memory. "Owen," he said, stepping inside and brushing snow off his heavy coat. "We've got a pre-burial walkthrough scheduled for this afternoon. The Carmichael service. Family wants to see the site before the 24th. Make sure it's accessible." "Got it. Section D, Row 12, Plot 7. I'll make sure the markers are clear and the path is plowed." He nodded, then paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You doing anything for Christmas?" "Staying local. My sister's coming up from Boston. We'll probably do dinner, exchange gifts. Nothing fancy. You?" "Same as always. Quiet dinner with the wife. Keeps getting quieter every year." He smiled faintly, a sad expression that suggested years of similar holidays, each one a little emptier than the last. Then he left, his boots crunching on the salted walkway outside. I spent the rest of the morning updating records and preparing for the walkthrough. Around 1 p.m., I ate lunch at my desk, a sandwich I'd brought from home, and reviewed the Carmichael file. Helen Carmichael had been 73 years old, a longtime Burlington resident, survived by 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Her death had been sudden, a heart attack at home. The burial would be simple, just immediate family. At 2 p.m., I grabbed my coat and walked out to Section D. The temperature had dropped since morning, hovering around 20 degrees, and the wind cut through my layers with casual cruelty. The snow had been cleared from the main paths, but the individual plots were still covered in a thin white layer, pristine and undisturbed, except for the tracks of birds and small animals. Section D was in the older part of the cemetery, dating back to the early 1900s. The headstones here were weathered, many of them tilted or sunken, the names and dates worn away by a century of New England weather. It was peaceful, though, lined with bare oak trees that provided shade in summer and a kind of skeletal beauty in winter. I found row 12 and located plot 7, a rectangular section near the edge of the area, bordered by a line of those old oaks. The site looked fine, accessible, ready. The ground was frozen solid, which would make digging difficult, but the crew had equipment for that. I marked the corners with small red flags and took a photo with my phone for the file. Then I turned and walked back toward the office, following the path that wound through the sections. And that's when I saw it. On the path ahead of me, partially covered by a dusting of fresh snow, was a sheet of paper. It looked like it had been left there recently, the edges still crisp and white, not yet soaked through or torn by wind. I picked it up and brushed off the snow with my gloved hand. It was a burial list, typed neatly, formatted exactly like the ones we generated in the office. It listed 4 names, along with their burial dates and plot locations. I recognized the format immediately because I'd created hundreds of these lists over the years. The font was Calibri, 11 point, the same default we used. The layout was identical, right down to the spacing and alignment. But I didn't recognize the names. Well, except one. The first name was Helen Carmichael, scheduled for December 24th, Section D, Row 12, Plot 7. That matched the request I'd processed that morning, down to the exact location. The second name was Roger Finch, scheduled for December 25th, Section B, Row 8, Plot 3. The third was Margaret Lyle, December 26th, Section F, Row 4, Plot 11. The fourth name was Owen Peterson, scheduled for December 27th, Section A, Row 1, Plot 5. I stared at the paper, reading my own name 3 times to make sure I wasn't misreading it. Owen Peterson, December 27th. That was me. That was my name. Scheduled for burial in 3 days. My hands started to shake, and this time it wasn't from the cold. I turned the paper over. The back was blank. No letterhead, no signature, no indication of where it had come from or who had created it. I looked around the path, scanning the rows of headstones and the tree line beyond the cemetery fence. There was no one. The cemetery was empty, except for me, and the distant sound of the grounds crews plow scraping asphalt in another section. I folded the paper carefully and walked quickly back to the office, my mind racing. Someone had created a fake burial list and left it for me to find. That was the only logical explanation. A prank, maybe, or some kind of morbid joke. But who would do that? And how did they know I'd be the one to find it? How did they know about Helen Carmichael's burial when that request had only come in last night? I got back to the office, locked the door behind me, and set the paper on my desk. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then I pulled up the cemetery database on my computer and started searching. Roger Finch. The name was familiar. I searched the records and found him quickly. He was Gerald's younger brother. I knew that from conversations and paperwork over the years. He lived in Burlington, retired from the Postal Service. No recent health issues that I was aware of. I pulled up his contact information and stared at it, debating whether to call him. Margaret Lyle. I searched for her next. She wasn't in our cemetery records, which meant she'd never purchased a plot here, never had family buried here. I did a quick online search and found her easily. She was a local elementary school teacher, 56 years old, someone I'd seen at town meetings and community events, but didn't know personally. Owen Peterson. Me. I logged into the plot database and checked Section A, Row 1, Plot 5. It was vacant, but it wasn't reserved. Anyone could theoretically be buried there if they purchased it. The plot had been empty since 1987, when the last burial in that row had taken place. I checked the other plots listed on the document. Section B, Row 8, Plot 3, was also vacant. Section F, Row 4, Plot 11 was vacant as well. Whoever had created this list had done their homework. Every location was available. Every detail was accurate, except for the fact that 3 of the 4 people listed were still alive. I sat back in my chair and tried to think rationally. This was a prank. It had to be. Someone with access to cemetery records, maybe a former employee, or someone from the town clerk's office, had created a fake document and left it for me to find. But why? What was the point? And why include real people's names? Why include my name? I pulled out my phone and called Gerald. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice slightly breathless, like he'd been outside in the cold. Gerald, it's Owen. I need to ask you something. Does your brother Roger have any health problems? Anything serious? There was a pause. Roger? No, he's fine. Healthy as a horse. Why do you ask? Just checking on something for the records. Never mind. Owen, what's going on? Nothing. I'll talk to you later. I hung up before he could ask more questions. I stared at the paper again, then folded it and put it in my desk drawer. I tried to get back to work, reviewing files, answering emails, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the list, about my name typed neatly beneath 3 other people who were still alive. By 4 p.m., I gave up and locked the office. I drove home through the early winter darkness, the streets of Burlington already decorated with Christmas lights and wreaths. My apartment was a small 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an old house near downtown. I climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped into the cold interior. I turned on the heat, made dinner, and tried to watch TV. But I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the moment I'd found the paper, the way it had looked so official, so real. I told myself again and again that it was a prank, that someone was messing with me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the old house settling around me. Every creak, every groan made me tense. I kept thinking about the list, about the date next to my name. December 27th, 3 days away. The next morning, December 20th, I arrived at the office to find a voicemail waiting on the cemetery's phone. The light was blinking red, insistent. I pressed play and listened. Hi, this is Linda from Crestview Funeral Services. We need to arrange a burial for Roger Finch. He passed away last night. Please call us back as soon as possible to schedule. Thank you. I stood frozen, the buzzer phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. Roger Finch, Gerald's brother, the second name on the list. My hands were shaking again, harder this time. I replayed the message to make sure I'd heard correctly. Roger Finch, passed away last night, December 19th. I pulled the list from my drawer and stared at it. Roger Finch, December 25th. Scheduled for burial on Christmas Day. This wasn't a prank. This was something else, something impossible. I called Crestview Funeral Services immediately. Linda answered on the second ring. her voice professional but tinged with sympathy. "This is Owen Peterson from Evergreen Memorial. I got your message about Roger Finch." "Yes, thank you for calling back. Mr. Finch passed away suddenly last night, around 11 p.m. Heart attack. The family would like to schedule a burial on December 25th, Christmas Day. They want a private service, just immediate family. Can you accommodate that?" "Yes, we can." My voice sounded distant, mechanical. "I'll need to verify plot availability and get back to you." "Of course. The family is hoping for Section B, if possible. Mr. Finch's parents are buried there." Section B, row 8. Exactly what the list said. I hung up and immediately called Gerald's cell phone. He answered on the first ring, his voice strained and thick. "Owen." "Gerald, I just heard about Roger. I'm so sorry." "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him breathing, trying to hold himself together. "He was fine yesterday. We had lunch together. He was fine. And then last night, just gone." "Gerald, I need to talk to you. Can you come to the office?" "I'm already on my way. I need to make arrangements." He arrived 15 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red, his face drawn and pale. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk and stared at his hands. "His wife called me at midnight," he said quietly. She'd found him on the couch, just sitting there like he'd fallen asleep. But he was gone. The paramedic said it was massive, that he probably didn't feel anything. That's supposed to make it better, I guess. "Gerald, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine." "We need to arrange the burial, December 25th. His wife wants it to be on Christmas with his parents. Section B." I hesitated, then pulled the list from my drawer and slid it across the desk. "Gerald, before we do that, I need to show you something. I found this yesterday afternoon, on the path in Section D." He picked up the paper and read it slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, to something darker. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "Where did you get this?" "I told you, I found it yesterday, on the path." It was just lying there, like someone had dropped it. He looked up at me, his face pale. "This is dated before Roger died." "I know. How is that possible?" "I don't know." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what we were looking at settling over us like a physical presence. Finally, Gerald spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who else is on this list?" "Helen Carmichael, scheduled for the 24th. Margaret Lyle, scheduled for the 26th. And me, scheduled for the 27th. He stared at the list, then at me. "Owen, this is someone's idea of a sick joke. It has to be." "Then how did they know about Roger?" The list was dated December 19th. "I found it yesterday afternoon. Roger died last night." "How did they know?" He didn't have an answer. He just sat there, holding the paper, his hands trembling. We spent the next hour making arrangements for Roger's burial. Section B, row 8, plot 3. Exactly as the list had predicted. Gerald left around noon, promising to call if he needed anything else. I watched him walk to his truck, his shoulders slumped, and felt a deep sense of dread settling into my bones. Helen Carmichael's burial proceeded as scheduled on December 24th. It was a small service, just family, held under a gray sky with snow falling lightly. I watched from the office window as they lowered the casket into the ground, the family standing in a tight circle around the grave, their breath fogging in the cold air. The whole thing took less than 30 minutes. Then they were gone, and the cemetery was quiet again. December 25th came and went. Roger Finch was buried in Section B, row 8, plot 3, exactly as the list had predicted. Gerald didn't attend. He called in sick, said he couldn't face it, asked me to make sure everything went smoothly. I did. I stood at a distance and watched as they buried Gerald's brother in the frozen ground. And all I could think about was the list. 2 names crossed off. 2 more remaining. Margaret Lyle, scheduled for December 26th, and me, scheduled for December 27th. I tried to reach Margaret Lyle on Christmas night. I called her home number, found through a quick online search, and left a voicemail. Ms. Lyle, this is Owen Peterson from Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. Please call me back as soon as possible. She didn't call back. I sent an email to the address listed on the school district's website. No response. On the evening of December 25th, after Roger's burial, I drove to her house. It was a small ranch-style home on the east side of Burlington, in a quiet neighborhood where the houses were close together and the Christmas decorations were still lit. Her house had lights strung along the eaves and a wreath on the door. The lights were on inside. Her car, a silver Honda sedan, was in the driveway. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door, my heart pounding. I knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the cold evening air. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and called her name. Ms. Lyle, it's Owen Peterson. I need to talk to you. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I hesitated, my hand on the cold metal, debating whether I should go. Inside, this was breaking and entering. This was illegal. But something told me I didn't have time to worry about legality. Something told me that if I didn't check on her now, it would be too late. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Margaret, Ms. Lyle, it's Owen Peterson from the cemetery. I'm sorry for intruding, but I need to talk to you. The house was warm, almost stifling after the cold outside. The TV was on in the living room, playing a Christmas movie on mute. The lights were on in the kitchen. Everything looked normal, lived in, peaceful. I walked through the hallway, past family photos on the walls, and into the kitchen. Margaret was sitting at the table, her head resting on her arms, a cup of tea in front of her. For a moment, I thought she was asleep. Margaret, she didn't move. I stepped closer and saw that her skin was gray, her lips faintly blue. I reached out and touched her shoulder. She was cold. Not room temperature, but cold. She'd been dead for hours. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at 247 Oakwood Drive. There's a woman here, Margaret Lyle. She's dead. I think she's been dead for hours. The dispatcher asked me questions, told me to stay on the line, promised that help was on the way. I stood in the kitchen, staring at Margaret's body, and felt the world tilting around me. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. They confirmed what I already knew. Margaret Lyle was dead, likely from a stroke, probably sometime in the late afternoon or early evening. They took her body away, and I gave a statement to the police, explaining that I'd been trying to reach her about cemetery business, that I'd found the door unlocked and gotten worried. I didn't mention the list. By the time I got home, it was after midnight. December 26th was over. Margaret Lyle was dead, exactly as the list had predicted. 3 names crossed off, 1 remaining. Mine. December 27th was tomorrow. I sat in my apartment, the lights on, and stared at the list. I'd brought it home with me, unable to leave it at the office, unable to let it out of my sight. I read it over and over, studying every detail, looking for something I'd missed, some clue that would explain what was happening. There was nothing, just 4 names, 4 dates, 4 locations. 3 of them were already gone, and I was next. I called Gerald. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking. Gerald, it's Owen. I need your help. Margaret Lyle is dead. 3 people on the list are dead. I need to talk to you. Please call me back. He didn't. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the list, my name at the bottom, waiting. I thought about running, leaving town, going somewhere far away. Disappearing until December 27th was over. But where would I go? And what would that accomplish? If the list was real, if somehow this was more than just a coincidence, then distance wouldn't matter. Geography wouldn't save me. On the morning of December 26th, I drove to the cemetery. I needed to see the plot. Section A, Row 1, Plot 5. The place where, according to the list, I would be buried tomorrow. I parked near the office and walked through the sections, following the paths I'd walked thousands of times before. Section A was one of the oldest parts of the cemetery, dating back to the 1840s. The headstones here were ancient, many of them illegible, leaning at odd angles or cracked by frost and time. I found row 1 and counted the plots. Plot 5 was near the center, a rectangular patch of ground marked only by small brass numbers embedded in the earth. The site was empty, unmarked, just snow-covered grass and frozen soil. I stood there for a long time, staring down at the place where, according to the list, I would be laid to rest tomorrow. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Then I turned and walked back toward the office, my mind numb, my body moving on autopilot. Gerald was waiting for me inside. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn, his hands trembling as he held a cup of coffee. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Guilt. "Owen," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "I know, I've been trying to reach you." He set down the coffee and gestured to the chair. "Sit down." I sat, my heart pounding. He looked at me for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and placed it on the desk between us. It was another burial list. Older, yellowed with age, but formatted identically to the one I'd found. It listed 4 names, 4 dates, 4 locations. The last date was December 27th, 2004. "I found this 20 years ago," Gerald said quietly. "In the same place you found yours, on a path in Section D. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. And then the first person died, then the second, then the third." I stared at the list, my hands clenching into fists. "Who was the 4th name?" "Thomas Brennan. He worked here. He was the records clerk before you." Gerald's voice cracked slightly. "He died on December 27th, 2004. He was 31 years old. They found him in his apartment. Heart attack." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't think it would happen again. It had been 20 years, Owen. 20 years of nothing. I thought it was over." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You knew this could happen, and you didn't warn me." "I didn't know. I thought it was over." "Well, it's not over, Gerald. 3 people are dead. And tomorrow, according to this list, I'm next." He looked at me, his eyes filled with something like pity. "I've been researching this for 20 years, Owen. I've gone through every record, every document, every piece of history related to this cemetery. And I found something." He pulled open the desk drawer and removed a stack of old papers, ledgers, and documents that looked like they belonged in a museum. He spread them out on the desk. "It's happened before. Every 20 to 30 years, going back to 1874. A list appears. 4 names, 4 deaths, always around Christmas, always ending on December 27th. I picked up one of the documents, a handwritten burial record from 1874. 4 names were circled in faded red ink. Beside each name was a date in December. "What is this?" I whispered. "I don't know. A curse, maybe. Something tied to the cemetery itself. I've tried to figure out where it comes from, why it happens. But there's nothing. No pattern, no explanation. It just is." I looked up at him, anger and fear warring in my chest. "So what am I supposed to do? Just accept that I'm going to die tomorrow?" "I don't know, Owen. Thomas tried to run. He left town on December 26th, drove to Massachusetts. They found him dead in a motel room the next morning. Heart attack. So there's no way out. Gerald didn't answer. He just looked at me with those guilty, haunted eyes, and I knew the truth. There was no way out. I left the office and drove aimlessly through Burlington, my mind racing. I thought about calling my sister, telling her what was happening. But what would I say? That a mysterious list predicted my death, and there was nothing I could do about it. I thought about going to the police, but they'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. By evening, I found myself back at my apartment. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know. Waiting for midnight, maybe. Waiting for December 27th to arrive, and whatever fate the list had in store for me. My phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Gerald. "Owen, where are you?" "Home. Why?" "You need to come to the cemetery. Now." "Why?" "Just come, please." I drove to Evergreen Memorial through the dark streets. The cemetery gates standing open like a mouth waiting to swallow me. I parked near the office and saw Gerald's truck already there. I got out and walked toward the office, but the lights were off. "Gerald?" I called out. "Over here." His voice came from deeper in the cemetery. I followed it, walking through the sections, my breath fogging in the cold air. I found him standing in Section A, Row 1, at Plot 5. "Gerald, what are we doing here?" He turned to face me, and in the moonlight, I could see tears on his face. "I'm sorry, Owen. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" He pulled something from his coat, a piece of paper. He held it out to me. It was a burial permit, signed and dated. My name was on it. Owen Peterson, December 27th, 2023. Section A, Row 1, Plot 5. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's your permit," he said softly. "It appeared on my desk this afternoon. I didn't file it. I didn't create it. It just appeared." I took the paper from him, staring at it in disbelief. It looked official, legitimate, bearing the cemetery's seal and Gerald's signature. But I could see that the signature was slightly off, not quite matching his usual handwriting. "This isn't real," I said. "I know, but it doesn't matter. The cemetery has decided. Once your name is on the list, once the permit appears, there's no stopping it." I looked up at him, anger flooding through me. "You're saying the cemetery decides who dies? That's insane." "I know how it sounds, but I've seen it happen, Owen. Thomas tried to fight it. He tried to run. It didn't matter. The cemetery took him anyway." "So what? You're just gonna let it take me too?" He looked at me, his face twisted with anguish. "I don't know how to stop it. I've tried. For 20 years, I've tried to understand this, to find a way to break the pattern. But there's nothing. It's bigger than us." I stepped back, away from him, away from the empty plot that was supposedly my grave. "I'm not going to die, Gerald. I refuse." "Owen!" "No, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here." I turned and ran, sprinting through the cemetery, past rows of headstones and bare trees, toward the gate. Behind me, I heard Gerald calling my name, but I didn't stop. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and started the engine. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, just away, anywhere but here. I made it to the interstate and headed south, toward Massachusetts, toward anywhere that wasn't Burlington, wasn't Vermont, wasn't that cursed cemetery. I drove for 2 hours, stopping only when I was too exhausted to continue. I pulled into a rest stop somewhere south of Brattleboro and sat in the parking lot, engine running, heat blasting. I checked the time. 1:47 a.m., December 27th, had arrived. I sat there until dawn, watching the sky slowly lighten, waiting for something to happen. A heart attack, a stroke, some sudden, inexplicable death. But nothing came. I was fine, tired, terrified, but alive. By 8 a.m., I convinced myself that I'd escaped, that Gerald was wrong, that distance did matter, that I'd broken the pattern. I drove to a diner, ordered breakfast, and sat by the window watching normal people live their normal lives. My phone rang at 9 a.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Owen Peterson? Yes? This is Officer Daniels with the Burlington Police Department. We need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about Margaret Lyle's death. My stomach dropped. I already gave a statement. I understand, but we need to follow up. There are some inconsistencies we need to clarify. Can you come in today? I'm not in Burlington right now. When will you be back? I hesitated. I don't know. Mr. Peterson, we really need to speak with you. If you don't come in voluntarily, we may need to issue a warrant. I closed my eyes. I'll be there this afternoon. I drove back to Burlington, arriving at the police station around 2 p.m. Officer Daniels was young, maybe 30, with a professional demeanor that barely concealed his suspicion. He led me to an interview room and spent the next 2 hours asking questions. How had I known to check on Margaret Lyle? What was my relationship with her? Why had I entered her home without permission? Had I touched anything? Moved anything? I answered as honestly as I could without mentioning the list. I told them I'd been trying to reach her about cemetery business, that I'd gotten worried when she didn't respond, that I'd found the door unlocked and gone inside to check on her. They didn't arrest me, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They let me go around 4:30 p.m. with a warning not to leave town. I drove back to the cemetery. I don't know why. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go. Maybe because I needed to confront Gerald, to demand answers. Maybe because some part of me had already accepted what was going to happen. The sun was setting when I arrived, the sky streaked with orange and pink. The cemetery was quiet, empty except for Gerald's truck still parked near the office. I got out and walked toward it, my footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The office door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Gerald was sitting at my desk, staring at something in his hands. When he heard me enter, he looked up. His face was wet with tears. "Owen," he said quietly, "I didn't think you'd come back. What are you doing here?" He held up what he'd been looking at. It was a photo, old and faded. It showed 2 men standing in front of the cemetery gates, smiling at the camera. One was Gerald, much younger. The other I didn't recognize. "This is Thomas," Gerald said. "Thomas Brennan, the clerk before you. This was taken a week before he died." I stepped closer, looking at the photo. Thomas had been young, probably around my age, with dark hair and an easy smile. He looked healthy, happy, alive. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand. Thomas was my friend. He was like a son to me, and I couldn't save him. I couldn't stop what happened." Gerald's voice broke. "I thought I could stop it this time. I thought if I warned you, if I told you everything, maybe you'd have a chance. But I was wrong." "Gerald, what are you talking about?" He stood up slowly, his movements stiff and painful. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, ancient and broken. "The cemetery doesn't just predict deaths, Owen. It causes them. And I'm the one who has to carry out its will." I took a step back, my heart starting to race. "What?" "I didn't want to. I tried to fight it. But it doesn't give me a choice." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out something I couldn't quite see. "I'm sorry, Owen. I'm so sorry." I turned and ran. I made it out of the office and into the cemetery proper, running blindly between headstones and monuments. Behind me, I heard Gerald calling my name, but his voice was strange now, hollow and distant, like it was coming from far away. I ran deeper into the cemetery, toward Section A, though I didn't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe the cemetery itself was guiding me. I reached row 1 and stumbled, falling to my knees in the snow. When I looked up, they were there. Figures, dozens of them. standing among the headstones, watching me. They were translucent, barely visible in the fading light, like shadows given form. Their faces were indistinct, but I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their presence pressing in from all sides. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. I looked around desperately and saw Gerald walking toward me through the rows of graves. But it wasn't Gerald anymore. His face was slack, his eyes empty, like he was sleepwalking. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice flat and mechanical. "The cemetery has chosen. There's no escaping it." The figures moved closer, surrounding me, their presence suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt cold spreading through my chest, a numbness that started in my heart and radiated outward. This was it. This was how I died, not from violence or disease, but from the cemetery itself, from whatever dark force had been claiming lives here for over a century. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But it didn't come. I opened my eyes and found myself alone. The figures were gone. Gerald was gone. I was lying in the snow in Section A, Row 1, Plot 5, the exact spot where the list said I would be buried. But I was alive. I stood up slowly, my body shaking with cold and adrenaline. The cemetery was silent, empty. The sun had set completely, and darkness had fallen. I walked back to the office on unsteady legs. The door was still open. Inside, Gerald was sitting at the desk, his head in his hands. When I entered, he looked up, and I saw that he was himself again. The emptiness in his eyes was gone. "Owen," he said, his voice filled with relief and confusion. "You're alive. What happened?" "I don't know. I don't remember. 1 minute I was showing you the photo, and then nothing. And now you're here. It's past midnight. December 27th is over." I looked at the clock on the wall. 12:07 a.m., December 28th. I had survived. Gerald and I sat in the office for the rest of that night, trying to make sense of what had happened. We examined the list, the old records, every piece of evidence we had, and we reached one conclusion. The pattern had been broken. For the first time in over a century, the cemetery's prediction had failed. I was still alive, but we didn't know why. That was 3 weeks ago. I still work at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. I still manage the records, still file the paperwork, still walk those rows of graves. But everything feels different now. The cemetery feels different, like it's watching me, waiting. Because 2 days ago, on January 14th, I found another piece of paper on the path in Section D. It was a burial list, 4 new names, 4 new dates in February, and my name was on it again. This time, I'm scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. I've tried to run, I've tried to leave, but every time I pack my bags, every time I get in my car and start driving, I find myself turning around and coming back. Like there's an invisible cord tying me to this place, pulling me back no matter how far I go. Gerald says the cemetery has marked me, that I escaped once, but it won't let me escape again, that it's patient, that it will wait as long as it takes. I don't know if he's right. I don't know what's going to happen on February 14th. All I know is that I can feel something watching me, following me, waiting for its chance. And I'm starting to think that Gerald is right about one more thing. There's no escaping Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. Once it's chosen you, you belong to it forever.